You know, there are certain things in life you can almost predict with astonishing accuracy. And when it comes to people who live in patterns of entitlement, lack of empathy, and manipulation, their words follow a script. It's remarkable because after a while, you start to see the repetition, the predictability, and the ways these words are designed not to build you up, but to destabilize you. And once you see the script clearly, you no longer have to personalize it. You start to realize that it's not about you. It's about them running their old playbook again and again. One thing you can count on them to say is, "You're too sensitive." And here's the thing. What they're really doing is dismissing your emotional reality. They don't want to have to reckon with your feelings, your hurt, or the impact of their behavior. So instead, they pathologize you. They make sensitivity, which is actually a sign of humanity, empathy, and depth, into a weakness. Over time, if you don't catch this, you start believing that narrative. You second guess yourself, you suppress your emotions, and you start living small. But the truth is, sensitivity is not the problem. Their unwillingness to take responsibility is. When you can recognize that line for what it is, deflection, you can start reclaiming the right to feel what you feel. Another thing you will hear is, "You're overreacting." And this is a form of gaslighting. Because here's the trick. They want you to doubt your perception of reality. They want you to wonder if you're blowing things out of proportion. They want you to be so tangled up in questioning yourself that you stop holding them accountable. But here's what I want you to remember. Your reactions come from somewhere. They're not born out of thin air. If something hurt you, if something landed wrong, then your reaction makes sense in the context of your experience. Minimizing your response is their way of minimizing their behavior. You don't have to buy into that anymore. You'll also notice a classic line that goes something like, "You're remembering it wrong." And again, this is about destabilization. They will rewrite history with such confidence that you begin to wonder if your memory can be trusted. And the moment you start doubting your own memory, they have more control. That's why journaling, documenting, even just writing down your own recollections can be so powerful. Because when they say that, you have a touchstone. You have your truth in your own words. And you no longer have to argue with someone who is invested in distorting reality. Another one that shows up is, "Everyone agrees with me." And this is a tactic meant to isolate you, to make you feel like you're the outlier, the unreasonable one, the problem. It creates this illusion of consensus, as though the whole world sees you as the difficult one. It plays on our deepest fear of being rejected, of being left out, of being abandoned. But the truth is, more often than not, they're exaggerating or fabricating. And even if a few people are agreeing with them, that doesn't invalidate your reality. Consensus does not equal truth. And the moment you stop needing everyone to see your perspective, the moment you stop chasing their approval, you regain your power. And then there's the line that sounds like, "I never said that." Which, again, is part of the gaslighting cycle. You know what you heard. You know the words that were spoken. But when they deny it outright, it shakes your confidence. Over time, these little denials accumulate, and you start feeling like you can't trust your own mind. But you can. And that's the thing. They know they said it. They're not confused. They're not forgetful. They're just rewriting reality in real time to avoid accountability. When you step back and recognize these 5 patterns, You're too sensitive. You're overreacting. You're remembering it wrong. Everyone agrees with me? I never said that. What you're actually doing is reclaiming your narrative. You're no longer falling for the script. You're seeing the strategy. And in that clarity, there's freedom. Freedom to stop personalizing. Freedom to stop defending. Freedom to stop twisting yourself into knots to make sense of what cannot make sense. The power is not in changing them. It's not in convincing them to stop saying these things. It's in recognizing the script and then deciding you're no longer going to play the role they've assigned to you. Because once you step out of their script, you can finally step back into your own story. When we talk about this idea that certain kinds of people follow a script, what we're really talking about is predictability. It might not feel predictable when you're in it because you're overwhelmed, confused, or even blindsided by the moment. But when you step back, you begin to notice the repetition. The same words show up over and over again, regardless of the situation. And that is one of the clearest signs that these patterns are not about you. They're about the person using them. They're pulling from a playbook that doesn't change because they only know how to navigate the world by minimizing, dismissing, and destabilizing others. Let's take that phrase, "You're too sensitive." The first time you hear it, you might brush it off. Maybe you even wonder if it's true. After all, we all want to be reasonable. We all want to seem balanced. We don't want to be dismissed as emotional. But when that phrase gets repeated, when it shows up every time you try to share a feeling or express hurt, you start to notice the pattern. It doesn't matter what the situation is, whether it's a small slight or a major betrayal. The response is the same. You're told you're too sensitive. That's the script. Why is that phrase so effective for them? Because it strikes at something deeply human. We all want our emotions to be seen as valid. And when someone suggests that our emotions are excessive or inappropriate, it plants a seed of doubt. That seed grows into self-questioning. Suddenly, instead of focusing on what hurt you, you're focusing on whether your reaction was too much. It becomes a diversion. And that diversion serves them because it takes the spotlight off their behavior and puts it on your response. Now, if you've ever been on the receiving end of this kind of language, you know how corrosive it can be over time. It erodes your trust in yourself. You start to hesitate before bringing things up. You start to swallow your feelings because you're tired of being told you're sensitive. You begin shrinking, minimizing your voice, and second, guessing your instincts. And that's exactly what the script is designed to do. Silence you, invalidate you, and keep you in a place where you don't challenge the behavior that's actually problematic. But once you begin to recognize the script, the dynamic changes. Instead of thinking, maybe I am too sensitive, you start thinking, here it is again. The same line, the same deflection. That awareness is incredibly powerful because it allows you to step out of personalization and step into observation. You stop seeing the words as a reflection of your worth and start seeing them as a reflection of their pattern. Think of it like watching a movie you've already seen a dozen times. The first time, the jump scare makes you leap out of your seat. By the 10th time, you know it's coming. You see the setup, you hear the music building, and you're no longer surprised. That's what it's like when you start noticing these phrases. The emotional impact begins to lessen because the predictability makes it clear that it's not spontaneous, it's scripted. This recognition also frees you to reclaim your own sensitivity as a strength. Sensitivity is the foundation of empathy, compassion, creativity, and depth of connection. The world needs sensitivity. It's what allows people to care, to love deeply, to see beyond themselves. When someone dismisses that as weakness, it's because they don't want to deal with accountability, not because sensitivity is actually a flaw. Reframing that truth is a radical act of self-preservation. What makes these predictable phrases so powerful is that they're universal across contexts. It doesn't matter if you're in a relationship, at work, or even within family dynamics. You will hear the same dismissals repeated. That universality should remind you that it's not unique to you. They are not saying, "You're too sensitive," because you, specifically, are somehow broken or flawed. They say it because that's the only tool in their toolbox for handling emotional conversations. And when you realize that, you can stop twisting yourself into knots trying to fix what isn't broken in you. The challenge, of course, is that even when you intellectually recognize the script, the emotional sting can linger. You might still feel small when those words are hurled at you. That's normal. The work is in catching yourself in that moment and gently reminding yourself, this is the pattern. This is not about me. My emotions are valid. That simple shift, moving from internalizing the dismissal to externalizing it as part of their predictable script, creates space for self-compassion and resilience. The more you practice recognizing these repeated lines, the more empowered you become. You stop waiting for them to validate you because you understand that they never will, and you start turning inward for validation, acknowledging your sensitivity not as a defect, but as a profound part of your humanity. Gaslighting is one of the most insidious tools that shows up in these dynamics, and it often comes disguised in the simplest of phrases. Something as seemingly harmless as, "You're overreacting," or "You're remembering it wrong," can take root and slowly chip away at your sense of reality. What makes this so destabilizing is that it doesn't just create conflict in the moment. It creates doubt that lingers. You begin to question not only the specific situation, but also your broader ability to trust yourself, your memory, and your feelings. That erosion of self-trust is the exact outcome they are aiming for. Because the less you trust yourself, the more you end up depending on them to define reality for you. When you hear the words, "You're remembering it wrong," it can feel like someone pulling the rug out from under you. You were certain of what happened. You remember the words, the tone, maybe even the exact circumstances. But when someone denies it with conviction, it creates an internal storm. You wonder, did I mishear? Am I exaggerating? Am I mixing things up? And over time, that repeated denial becomes exhausting. It is often easier to surrender and doubt yourself than to keep pushing back against someone who seems so unwavering in their version of events. That surrender is the point where gaslighting takes hold. Gaslighting is effective because it preys on the natural human tendency to self-reflect. Most of us want to be fair, balanced, and open to the idea that maybe we misunderstood something. That self-awareness, which is usually a strength, becomes a vulnerability in the presence of someone who uses it to manipulate. They exploit your openness to question yourself. They count on your willingness to think, "Maybe I got it wrong," while never offering the same humility themselves. Instead, they double down on their version of events, leaving you in a fog of uncertainty. What makes this tactic particularly harmful is its cumulative effect. One instance of someone denying your memory might not shake you too deeply. But when it happens again and again, it builds a kind of erosion. Over time, you start to feel disoriented in your own life. You begin to distrust your own mind, and that is a terrifying place to be. Because if you can't trust yourself, how do you make decisions? How do you set boundaries? How do you stand firm in your truth? The answer is, you don't. And that is exactly why gaslighting is used. It is not about confusion for confusion's sake. It is about control. Recognizing gaslighting for what it is means seeing the manipulation beneath the words. When someone says, "You're remembering it wrong," or "That never happened," the immediate temptation is to argue, to prove your version of events, to bring up details as evidence. But the reality is, it's not about evidence. It's not about truth. It's about them maintaining power by keeping you off balance. That's why the best strategy is not necessarily to fight harder to prove your memory, but to quietly affirm to yourself, "I know what I experienced. I trust my recollection. Their denial does not erase my truth." This is where practices like journaling, keeping records, or even just confiding in a trusted friend can become so powerful. When you write down your version of events as they happen, you create a touchstone for yourself. Later, when someone tries to twist reality, you have something tangible to return to. That piece of paper becomes your anchor in a storm of distortion. It's not about convincing them. It's about protecting your own mind from being rewritten by someone who benefits from your doubt. It's important to also acknowledge the emotional toll of gaslighting. It is not just an intellectual confusion. It's deeply destabilizing to your sense of self. Many people describe feeling like they're going crazy because they can no longer trust their own perceptions. That feeling of losing your grip on reality can create anxiety, depression, and a sense of helplessness. It is not a minor slight. It's a profound psychological harm. Naming it as gaslighting helps to externalize the problem. It is not that you are crazy. It is that someone is actively trying to make you feel that way. And here's the deeper truth. You do not need to convince them of your reality. You only need to remain anchored in it yourself. The real power comes in no longer chasing validation from someone who is invested in denying it. Every time you remind yourself that your experience is valid, even when it is denied, you chip away at the hold of gaslighting. The fog begins to clear. The noise of their denials gets quieter. And in that space, your own voice gets stronger. When someone says, "Everyone agrees with me," it may sound like just another opinion, but it's actually a calculated move designed to isolate you. That phrase is not about truth. It's about creating a sense of consensus that positions you as the odd one out. And human beings are wired to belong. We are social creatures. We thrive in community, and we feel safer when we're connected. So when someone suggests that you're alone in your perspective, it taps into a very primal fear. That fear of being rejected, excluded, abandoned. That fear can make you fold in on yourself, doubt your instincts, and start to question whether it's worth speaking up at all. The reality is, people who use that phrase are often exaggerating, twisting, or even fabricating the idea of agreement. They rarely have a chorus of supporters standing behind them. Instead, what they rely on is the assumption that you won't check, that you won't confront, that you'll just accept the claim and internalize the idea that your voice is the minority. And once you believe you're the minority, you're less likely to challenge, less likely to resist, and more likely to silence yourself. That is the power of isolation as a tactic. It doesn't have to be real to be effective. It just has to feel real to you. Over time, this creates a distorted picture of reality. You begin to imagine that there's a collective judgment against you, that somehow you're the unreasonable one because everyone sees it differently. And once you start to believe that, you start reshaping yourself to fit into their narrative. You mute your feelings, you suppress your truth, because the thought of being the one who stands alone feels unbearable. But the truth is, standing alone does not mean you are wrong. Standing alone often just means you are the only one willing to call out something others are too afraid to acknowledge. It's important to remember that consensus is not a measure of truth. Just because a group of people agrees on something does not make it right, does not make it moral, and does not make it valid. History is full of examples where the majority went along with harmful, destructive, or cruel ideas. The comfort of agreement does not guarantee the presence of justice. When someone uses "everyone agrees with me" as a weapon, they are exploiting the illusion of safety in numbers to push you into silence. But silence is not the same as agreement. Many people may remain quiet around them out of fear, discomfort, or simply exhaustion. That doesn't mean they agree. It means they don't want to get pulled into the storm. One of the most disorienting parts of hearing this phrase is that it shifts the focus away from the real issue. Instead of discussing the problem at hand, you're suddenly put on the defensive about your own reasonableness. You're left wondering, am I really the only one who sees it this way? And that shift in focus is intentional. It diverts attention away from their behavior and puts the spotlight on your supposed otherness. It's a way of silencing the core of what you're trying to say. The antidote to this tactic lies in reclaiming your right to hold your own perspective regardless of whether others agree. Your truth does not require a majority vote. It doesn't lose validity just because someone else claims that everyone sees it differently. In fact, your willingness to hold on to your perspective in the face of manufactured consensus is a profound act of courage. It means you trust yourself enough to not need the comfort of others' validation. It also helps to remember that people who say, "everyone agrees with me," often have very selective hearing. They highlight the voices that echo them and ignore the voices that don't. They collect opinions that support their story and conveniently dismiss the ones that don't align. So, what you're hearing is not a real reflection of collective opinion. It's a curated version of reality meant to reinforce their narrative. Once you understand that, the phrase loses some of its power. It's no longer an intimidating consensus. It's a manipulation tactic dressed up as majority rule. The more you strengthen your ability to sit with your own perspective, the less these words will land. You stop needing everyone else to agree with you in order to know your truth is real. You stop fearing the discomfort of being the lone voice because you realize that your perspective is worthy simply because it is yours, shaped by your lived experience, your values, and your integrity. The more grounded you are in that, the less sway the illusion of consensus has over you. The phrase, "everyone agrees with me," is not an observation, it's a tool. It's a way to keep you quiet, to make you feel small, and to separate you from your own sense of power. The moment you stop giving it that power the isolation tactic crumbles. You may find that you're not as alone as they want you to believe. And even if you are, you come to see that standing alone in truth is far less lonely than standing with a crowd in denial. What all of this really comes down to is recognizing the patterns for what they are. These phrases, whether it's being told you're too sensitive, that you're overreacting, that your memory can't be trusted, that everyone is against you, or that something was never said, are not spontaneous truths. They're rehearsed, recycled strategies meant to destabilize you, silence you, and strip you of trust in yourself. The power doesn't lie in convincing them to stop saying these things, because they likely won't. The power lies in your ability to see the script clearly, to refuse to take it personally, and to step back into the authority of your own story. Once you stop playing the role their words assign you, you reclaim your voice, your clarity, and the freedom to live outside of their control.